Yes, good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are. We are going to start the call, and my name is Shime Ivone, and I'm based in Rwanda. We are going to have our brother Awad, starting with our prayer. Awad, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
All right. Let us all bow our heads and let us pray. Ngativharei maziso edu tinamate. Ngatinamate. Tenzi Mwari Baba, tokutendai nechipo choupenyu chamunotipazanidzwa. Tokutendai Mwari Baba nezuva iro rinonzera nhasi. Tasvika pane dzimwe nguva tada kuita musangano uno. Chitungamirai Mwari Baba kumativi enyika akasiyana siyana atiri. Chitungamirai chiisa maspeakers mumaoko edu. Chiisa our co-founder vamapondera. Maita Mwari Baba zvavanotidzidzisa tive tinozviita mukati mekurarama kwedu. Chiisa zvakare Mwari Baba vachadzidzisa zveutano. Mama Nana Akuwa dai maita kuti Mwari Baba zvatinodzidza tive tinova zvinochengetedza mukati mekurarama kwedu. Tisingakanganwi zvakare Mwari Baba uyo ari kudzidzisa nhoroondo yeAfrica, Dr. Tyrene Wright. Chitungamirai Mwari Baba musangano uno nemativi mana enyika akasiyana, Africa, Asia, Europe neAmerica. Dai maita kuti Mwari Baba tive tinobatana sevanhu vatema, zvese zvatinoronga zvikuva zvinofamba kubudikidza nembiri yenyu. Namata tenzi zvese zvinotaura nezvandasiya ndoisa mumaoko enyu. Musangano uno ndakuisa mumaoko enyu, zvese ndoisa nembiri yenyu kandisingaperi. Amen. Amen.
Yes, thank you very much, Awad. We are going to start with the country spokespersons. The first one will be Elijah Nyambuti from Kenya. Elijah Nyambuti, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, you only have 1 minute to present your report.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, dear members. I'm going to give a report from Kenya, which is dated 17th October 2021 to 22nd October 2021. Kenya weekly activities on 16th October 2021, the community had a Zoom meeting where I Love Black People mission was discussed by our co-founder, Mr. Christopher Mapondera. Members were given opportunity to ask questions and they were answered during the Zoom session. We had a class session with Dr. Tyrene Wright and Nana Kwasenzele. So this week, members were asked to recommend Black-owned, Black-friendly businesses. Regular newsletter was shared, which highlights on our 8 essential categories, which is education, health, legal, finance, transportation, beauty, food, and accommodation. Announcement was made to members to volunteer as ambassadors of I Love Black People. On 20th October 2021, here in Kenya, we celebrated our heroes and heroines on our national holiday, which is called Mashujaa Day. Social media accounts of I Love Black People was shared to group and members were encouraged to follow, like, and comment. Members and ambassadors were encouraged to attend online event which aims on building a global network using technology to protect people from racism and xenophobia. And finally, members were asked to prepare, write, and submit their weekly reports. The Kenya COVID-19 updates, the report is as from 22nd October 2021. The total confirmed cases are 252,375. The cumulative fatalities are 5,238. The recoveries are 245,882. Fully vaccinated are 2,657,001. Finally, my brothers and sisters, our mission is not complete until we make the whole world better and a safer place for Black people. Reporting from Kenya, I am Elijah Nyabuti, I am because we are.
Yes, thank you very much, Elijah Nyambuti from Kenya. Up next, we have Johanna Wawi. Yes, Johanna Wawe from Namibia, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, you only have 1 minute to present your report.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Johan.
Sorry. Namibia report. My name is Joanna Wawe. Let me quickly. Sorry, I'm just getting my.
As you are searching for your report, we are going to continue with Felipe Jr. from Mozambique. Felipe, can you hear us? Felipe Jr., can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You only have 1 minute to present your report.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone, depending on the time and the way you are. So I will present the report that it's from Burkina Faso, that which informs us that we held a debate, online debate with people fighting against xenophobia and racism. And it was dedicated to FENPASCOR, which is an organization that also takes activities for fight this. It was taken a festival, international festival upon African cinema. And about COVID-19 in Burkina Faso, 18 October, we have active cases, 292, deaths, 2.214, recovers, 14,287, and total we have 14,793, vaccinated people 32,000, 5,119, yes, and it was submitted with our member coffee. So that's all what I have to tell you as a report from Burkina Faso. Thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you very much, Felipe Jr. from Mozambique. Up next, we have John Getichi from Kenya. John Getichi, can you hear us?
Yeah, I hear you very well.
Yes, you only have 1 minute to present your report.
Okay, I present, submit a report from Nigeria. From 17 October to 22 October, Nigeria weekly activity, the community had a Zoom meeting where I love Black people mission is to use technology, and we had to class session from co-founder Singla Skinner gave us a great idea of how to use technology to protect Black people from racism and xenophobia every time and everywhere. And co-founder Christopher Mabodera gave us a lecture that motivate African to make life better and struggle change African continent. With Tyrone Wright, good teachers historical facts about Pan-African books. she published, and beyond where Black people live. Nana Agua Sensala, Queen of Apes and Live Elcha Life. A member were asked to recommend Black-owned, Black-friendly businesses in our countries. Regular newsletter shared in all groups. Members were told to prepare and submit weekly report on COVID-19 and everything that it ought to work on it. That is on behalf of Nigeria. Thank you. My name is Joel Ngetich from Kenya. That is end of it.
Yes, thank you very much, John Getichi. We can have Johan. I think she got the report. Johan Wawe, can you hear us? Johan Wawe, can you hear us? I think maybe she has a problem with the internet. We are going to continue with Mr. Mapondera. Mr. Mapondera, can you hear us?
Yes, I sure can.
Yes, welcome, sir.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. As usual, it's a pleasure getting to meet with you every Saturday morning. I'm always looking forward to coming to meet with you. As I indicated, I try to think of areas that I think would be of interest to you, since I don't get too much feedback on what areas you'd like me to discuss. But nevertheless, I'll try my best. If there's anything that, again, you feel, we should talk about, let me know in time. I'm also noticing, that we have people from all over the world, all over Africa, the diaspora. So I'll also try to tie in the relevance of what we do to those in the diaspora. I think last week we had a pretty good case in point where one of our sisters was trying to find out how she can be able to be of service or contribute to Africa's development. I hope some of you may have taken advantage of getting in touch with her and see if there's any area of cooperation or collaboration, or maybe you can direct her as to where and how she can be able to utilize the skills that she has. I think this is a good platform for that as well. As you all understand that at this stage, I'm looking at the Pan-Africanism from what I consider to be a practical part of it. That is, whatever we do has to either contribute to the preservation of us as an African people, of our continent, what we do to assist fellow Africans, no matter where they are. We contribute. If there's a disaster, we see how we can contribute to that. If there is, something, that is going on of which, our ideas and their views could be of help, we should be able to do that. Now, today I'm going to talk about careers. Very few of our schools, I know during my time, we didn't even know who a career advisor was. You go all the way up to university, nobody really tells you, okay, you want to be an engineer, what are you going to do? Regardless of the fact that you may be a civil engineer, you may be electrical engineer, what have you. But there are so many ways in which you can utilize that skill you got from university or from a technical school and what have you. But if we have this career guidance starting at an early age, where let's say even as after 5 years of school, you start orienting kids to understand, what is there. I'm sure they see a doctor, they see a nurse, they see even their own teachers, but they don't put it in the context that, well, this is something I could do when I grow up. If you are like myself, I grew up in an environment where I had limited access to professional people, so I really didn't have any example of what I could do. But as time went on, and then as I got exposed to those who had gone to university or professional people and so forth, I never put myself. It seems like they were doing something they had done something very mythical, and it was very mind-boggling to me as to how they managed to get those skills. So, how do we, in the absence of having a career guidance person at your school, how else can we be able to become aware of those careers or areas that we can be able to go into? As I say, it doesn't matter. There's no career or skill that is better than the other. It depends on how you apply it for the betterment of yourself, or your family, your community, and overall for us as an African people. I indicated last time that Africa, we are sending out billions and billions of dollars every year, either in mineral exports, in buying food from other countries, what we send out, we train people in Africa, they go and work in other countries at the expense of working in Africa. The cost of training those people from grade 1 to university and whatever profession they have cost money, and our governments paid the money for that. Now, rather than those people provide those services to Africa, they go to other countries. So that is again another outflow of resources coming from Africa. So the question of career guidance, I think, is very, very important. If you don't have such a person to help you, or such an institution within your school or college and so forth, there are several sources, you can get that career guidance. You have to kind of look for it, extend yourself, and this could be, within your own family. Maybe your brother is doing something, or a sister. You can inquire, how did you get there? What does it take to do that, and so forth. For those who go to the church or to the mosque and so forth, those people that you interact with, they are into something that may be helpful to you. You can consult with them. Hey, I want to do this, or you are doing this. What does it mean? How does it? How can I do it, and so forth. And then, of course, as I say, in some of the colleges now they are beginning to provide that career guidance. But I've been to Africa several times. I talked to some of the university students. They go through college, but there is really nobody to give them that career guidance. Some of it could be the fact that because of lack of employment or jobs and so forth, even your own professor can't tell you, that, okay, they have not done a job, a degree in mechanical engineering, so you can go and work for a so-and-so. That is kind of mentality that we have. So your professor cannot say, okay, when you do this with your mechanical engineering degree, you're now going to do A, B, C, and D, and so forth. Because we look at it in the context of being employed by somebody else. it's very rare that you'll find career counselors telling you that, okay, I think with your education or skills that you have, you can be able to do A, B, C, and D, and so forth. And then there are so many ways that, again, you can get into it. Now, there's also the misconception, that the only way you can be somebody is to have a university degree, okay? And if you don't have a university degree, you don't think you are educated. But what don't take into account, that we want to develop as an African people. We need people who have got different trade skills. We need electricians. We need machine tool operators. We need tool makers. We need welders. We need machinists and all that. These are basic skills that are necessary and essential if you want to build an economy, if you want to build an industry. You cannot have an industry when you don't have a single person who knows how to do welding. You don't have people who are trained to make tools. You don't have people who are trained as machinists. As I indicated last time, Africa, we spend $30 billion, $30 billion a year importing spare parts, okay? But with the machining skills, boiler making skills and all that, we can be able to replace a lot of these spare parts that we are currently importing. So you don't need to have a degree to be a machinist. What you need, it's a basic, maybe O-level type, depending if you're in the British system and so forth, or 4 years of high school. And then you go to a trade school where you learn those particular skills. They are very, very important. You cannot run industry without an electrician. You cannot run industry without a welder, without a machinist, and those type of things. So my point is that those skills, at times when we don't understand what role they play in our lives, we tend to downplay them. But again, as I mentioned, that whatever we do, we must think in the context of how is it going to help to preserve the independence of Africa, where we become self-sufficient, okay? If we know how to make our own agricultural implements, it means now we can produce more food. When we produce more food, it means there's less food that we're going to be exporting, which means the money that we would have spent to buy imported food, we can now channel that money and then reinvest it in ourselves, in our community, and so forth. The other part, I was talking about the technical and engineering related type things, but there are also other skills, things like bookkeeping. It's a very important, skill. You don't need to have a degree to do bookkeeping. You can finish your high school, go and take a special course in bookkeeping, understanding how to utilize the, computer. There are various computer programs that you can be able to use that can assist, your community in terms of, development of whatever businesses that we do and so forth. Well, I put that under what I call, knowledge-based skills. Again, there are many interesting things, amazing things that I see young Africans, on the continent are doing with the computer skills that they are getting. The same thing applies, even here in America. You have young Black people who are also doing quite a lot of wonderful things. They're engaged, in every company you can think of, whether it is Microsoft, Facebook, Google. You'll find, there are both African people from the continent and the African American people from this country. They are all involved in these, big companies, that are involved in technology and so forth. But they got to where they are. Some were lucky enough that they had the counseling from somebody, saying, okay, this is what you can do with your computer engineering degree or your computer science degree and so forth. Or at times you don't even need to go to the degree level, that you can get to various certifications, in computer programs and so forth, which you can apply. Now, where are some of these things applicable to? For instance, we don't have shipping lines made in Africa, but you need the ships to be able to move things, volumes, let's say from east to south, east to west, north to south, vice versa, and so forth. It's cheaper to use sea transport than to carry things from one part of the continent to the other. But what does it take to build a massive ship that you can use for that? That's where, again, it ties up with my speech last time, on the importance of having iron and steel industries, on the continent, where we can start making all these products that require steel, like shipbuilding. Right now, if we want something from Egypt to go to South Africa, you may have to wait for a ship that is coming from Asia. It dumps the stuff in Egypt. From there, it moves on, dumping stuff in Tanzania and Dar es Salaam. From there, it goes to Maputo, from Maputo to Port Elizabeth, and so forth. So it will be dumping and picking, and so forth. So which means as an African people, we cannot set our own agenda of how we want to move our products from one part of Africa to the other. We have to be dependent on those ships coming from other continents on their way doing their own businesses. So they prioritize use of their ships to do their own businesses. We in Africa become an appendage where, okay, if those guys don't come on time, we're at their mercy, we can't do anything. So there's people looking for what is it that we have to do. We must become curious, particularly those who live along the coastlines, the countries that are border the seas, South Africa, Mozambique, Kenya, Tanzania, Angola, Namibia, Nigeria, all the countries that are along the ocean. That's where the skills for shipbuilding become an essential thing. But again, because we are oriented not to think in those contexts, we can't even imagine, can we really have an African ship, built by us and so forth? It's like somebody magical did it, and that the skills involved, some of those people we may have gone to college with them in the West or in Asia or in Europe and so forth. But for that type of stuff to be done, again, those basic trades that I was mentioning, welding, boiler making, machining, and so forth, become very, very essential. The other part that I would like to end up with, again, is the adoption of technology. That is going to help us leapfrog some of the developmental stages that other countries had to go through. So again, those computer skills become very, very important. Whatever you do, think in terms of how do you apply it towards the development of Africa or your community, depending on where you are. I think that is what I have for now. If there, I'd like to leave a little bit more time for questions, and I'll be glad to answer those.
Yes, there is a comment from Ivan Green that it seems to me that those countries who are investing in Africa and in some cases exploiting Africans' natural resources should at least be required to establish apprenticeships programs and other educational programs.
Can you go over that? I'm sorry, I couldn't quite understand what you're saying. Can you say that again a little bit louder?
Yes, it seems to me those countries who are investing in Africa and in some cases exploiting Africans' natural resources should at least be required to establish apprenticeship programs and other educational programs.
Yeah, well, I mean, that comes with the territory, you know. Many of the international multinationals that have set up, you know, operations in Africa, they provide some training, but that training is to meet their needs. They're not done in the context of meeting the needs of individual African countries, okay? They are training people to enable them to exploit more of our resources as much as possible. What I would advocate for is that they must train our people so that they add more value to the raw materials they are getting from us. Instead of selling raw diamonds, they must establish a place where they can cut and polish the diamonds, you know, done within the country. You know, if it is whatever they're into, they must at least do 2 or 3 stages of processing before they're allowed to take the stuff out. In order to do that, definitely you need to train local people to do that. It would be very expensive for them to get people from their countries to come and to get involved in these industries, you know, because they still have to maintain the same labor rates. Even if they bring somebody, let's say they are bringing someone from USA, where the minimum labor, right? I mean, rates now are like $15 US per hour, or even $7 US per hour. When they come to get involved in these industries in Africa, you know, some have to work, you know, 12, 14 hours, you know, so it's 14 hours by even $7 per hour if you took it at that level. But when you're talking of skilled labor, I mean, guys who are coming in as boiler makers, you know, welders and so forth, those guys you're paying anywhere between $40 and $70 per hour. So it becomes very expensive for them to do that. So this will compel them to train local people who can provide the same service, maybe for, you know, even $10 an hour can go a long ways for a situation where we have people still making $1 US a day, or people live on $1 US a day in some cases if they are lucky to do so. So the economics of operations will compel them to train people locally. So if our governments can force or put conditions, so that no, you can't come and just get raw materials, but you must be beneficiating to maybe 2 or 3 stages. Anything else? Anybody else?
Yes. Another question is that to make an impact on issues that affect the continent as whole, has the UN been contacted for collaboration?
What, the UN?
Been contacted for collaboration?
Well, I don't think we should continue to have the mentality of saying we need these multinational corporations, you know, to help us develop. I think that has played a more of a negative impact because it destroys our self-esteem, you know, that we can come up with solutions ourselves. You know, we've been trained to believe, you know, that well, unless the IMF or the World Bank or the United Nations get involved, we can't do things, you know. I mean, you've got countries that have done extremely well. I mean, Cuba has been under economic sanctions for a long time, and that Cuba is now providing the best doctors in the world. They're even providing doctors to the Western countries as well. You know, China developed without the need of the United Nations. You know, Germany, after World War II, they didn't ask for the United Nations to come and, you know, help them or whatever and so forth. So, but we, as in Africa, we're being conditioned to feel that, well, unless the UN or World Bank is involved, we can't do anything. So that has stunted our growth psychologically, you know, to feel, you know, that we can create our own environment, we can create our own economy, we can build our own machines that we can use for our industrial development. Okay, last question. I've got a minute to go, I guess.
The last question is, at least can our senior come up with a procedure that if these people come to do business in Africa, mostly.
Can you go over that again?
At least,
you're breaking.
Okay, sorry. At least can our senior come up with the procedure that if these people come to do their business in Africa, mostly in taking our resources, apart from tax, can they also at least partner with our local people?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's what it should be all about. Okay, if I had my way, no foreign company would be allowed to do business in Africa without a local partner. Okay, it should. There have been several versions. You know, like when you tell a foreign company, no, you can't do it on your own. You must have, you know, a certain percentage of local participation. They start making all kinds of noises. I mean, here in the US, there's also certain strategic industries where a foreigner is not allowed to take more than 15% of shareholding, you know, in a company that is doing something that is considered to be strategic. So, but when we say the same thing in Africa, everybody has got to, you know, has issues with that. Okay, so it becomes a policy matter that we must, you know, force these people to have local partners. Nobody should be allowed to just do business on their own and they are exploiting our resources. Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Well, same to you. Thank you so much. I'll open up my mind. Somebody made a comment about a closed mind. I'll open up my mind when we can talk next week. Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you too.
Right.
Yes, up next we have the Pan-African Healthcare class with Nana Akua. Nana Akua, yes. Can you hear us?
I can. Good morning.
Yes, good morning.
Well, listen, good afternoon, good evening. I know I'm still in the morning, you are not, right? Or a lot of you are not, right? So good day, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Hello. Thanks for joining. Thanks for the few faces I can see, beautiful Black people. So today's topic is managing stress. And so hopefully if you didn't get, I think I didn't send it Thursday and Friday, my mistake. I've had a busy week. So hopefully this morning from the class, you got the remaining handouts for this topic today. And so I'd like to just say, if you're in the group, and I'm actually just curious, and this might be a question that Yvonne can answer, but of those of you that are here on the call, how many are in the current WhatsApp group that's been receiving the lessons? And I know this is an open call, open to everyone, but who here is in this current WhatsApp Pan-African Healthcare group? Give me a fist in the comments or say me or something like that. Please. I'm anxious to see who is in this current WhatsApp group. Oh, yeah, still getting comments. Yeah, I'll be in a look. Woo. So, you know, Black people don't always agree. Y'all know that, right? Y'all know that. I'm just seeing the last little comments. I stepped away from the thing. I don't even know what happened. But yes, we have to always remember, though, to be respectful. Agree or disagree. I was giving my lecture outside last week, and someone, a friend of mine was helping me do some gardening, and they heard me commenting about one of the comments of my twang, and I should speak in an African accent. So I think that sometimes people say things, right? And maybe you're trying to be offensive, maybe not. But I think that we all have to be mindful of being respectful to folk, right? So now, I'm born in America. I'm from the country here, and people over the world may not know what that means, but I have a natural, what we in the US do call a country twang, right? You know, I'll talk for a little while and they'll be like, oh, where are you from? Right? And they can tell that I'm from South rural part. Like most of us, where I'm from, we had farms, or whether vegetable farms or animal farms or whatever. And people from that region speak with a particular accent. Now, anyone who knows me and knows that I'm born in America, if I started speaking in an African accent, it would appear disrespectful, I think, because then it would appear that I'm trying to mock or emulate someone, right? So it would be kind of ridiculous if I tried speaking in a different accent than which I naturally speak, right? So, and my friend commented about that, and they were like, well, they're saying you should speak in an African accent? Why would they say that? So the comment about Mr. Mapindera being closed-minded and now running. Like, I think you have to be mindful, if you're going to participate in a forum like this, you have to show respect. So I think sometimes those things that are being said, again, maybe you're being intentionally rude, maybe not, you know, I don't know. One day somebody said I was too much or whatever, I don't know. I think if we maybe stick to the topics, state your position and keep it moving, that'll probably be the best way to go, right? And it's a lot of talk in the group. And I was curious, and I don't know how many really have responded to my request of who was in the WhatsApp group. It's been a lot of chatter about religion and stuff like that in the WhatsApp group. People are not following the rules. You all are going off on and all kinds of things other than health topics. Then you'll say, well, I didn't sign up for the health topic, but it clearly says that it's a Pan-African health group. So I think we need to kind of sit back, figure out why you're here, what you're doing, how you want to be involved, how you want to participate, but in all ways, at all times, being respectful. If I'm here to talk about health, I stick to that. Dr. Wright is the expert with the Pan-African organizing and speaking on topics related to history and Pan-Africanism and what have you. I've been a Pan-Africanist for a long time. However, that's not why I'm here. So I stick to my topic. So if you happen to find yourself in a group and it's not discussing what you're interested in, right? We have free will. You have certain freedoms and rights. Feel free to remove yourself or be quiet. So even if you maintain your participation in the group, you don't have to always say something, especially if it's off topic. And I can say if I was, and I actually do take things personal, but I know that we have different beliefs. But all the rhetoric that's been in the group this week about religion and Christianity and ancestral spirits and all of this, of course, it is offensive to me as a traditional priest that strongly believes in ancestral spirits. But you all went into this long dialogue about ancestral spirits being evil, and so it's too much, and it doesn't belong in the health group, right? You've been given warning, and people still keep writing stuff. So it's just too much. So I hope that we will stick to the topic at hand and show respect for everyone that's involved. We're all spending our time, and I know on the continent you're spending your data, right? And there's a lot that goes into this. So we all have to be and show equal and mutual respect. Yeah, some people ignore and delete the comments. Yeah, yes, definitely people veer off. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I agree, Victoria. They should definitely be removed. And I think that Yvonne is doing some removing of this. But as soon as she'll give a reminder of the rules, they'll still send another message right after that. And it's like they've ignored the reminder. But yes, so I would also make that request. As soon as they start going off into all these tangents, I just straight remove them. And I think as an administrator, I can do that. I just haven't. I also try to turn off my notifications because there's so many dings that I get. And because we're all on different times, I had to turn them off because I'll be asleep and I keep getting dings because, you know, you all are up while we're still sleeping and vice versa. But yes, I'm saying, please stick to the rules of the group, you know, stick to the rules of this platform altogether. So I have done a lot of talking off the topic, so let me get on it. So we're talking about stress. And listen, all of this can be stressful, but that's not why we're here, right? So we're here to learn how to be at our best, how to operate at an optimal level so that we can continue to fight for our freedom, right? And so these things that cause us stress, yeah, we have the ability and the power to, you know, avoid these things, you know, remove ourselves from these things, in addition to the stuff that we'll talk about today. I am going to pull up my handout. Hopefully you receive them. It seems like maybe, and I see a lot of the same faces, so you may not be in the current group. I mean, nonetheless, I'm glad that you are here, so I'm not saying you have to be in the current group. So you may have heard this information before, and you may already have the handouts. Oh, I also know that some people who from the group last week, you requested the handouts. Again, I had a busy week. I did not get to send out the packets, which I will do. So if you have requested, I'll go back through to my emails and I will send out the handouts that you requested from last week. I have not had the opportunity to do that. Every week I have a couple of handfuls of emails that I get every time. Usually by Monday or so I can respond and send out the handouts. Just was not able to do that this week. But I will send out all the handouts for the whole 4-week worth of classes, okay? If you'll allow me to share the screen, Yvonne, I'll try to pull up the handouts. Thank you, without showing you all of my other stuff that's probably open on my tablet here. Okay, so are we seeing effective methods of handling stress?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so stress. What is stress? We face and encounter stress every day. There's no way to avoid it. What we can change or control is our response to stress, right? So stress is basically a state of physical or mental tension, right? Something that causes or induces mental or physical tension. It's a pressure or strain that tends to distort a body and just causes it to be sort of off kilter, out of balance, causing some physiological or psychological, emotional or mental upset or tension or off balance, right? And so these are things that can be from a work situation, a relationship situation. You could have an argument or a disagreement with your mate. You can have a dispute with a colleague or coworker. You may have a physicalness. This can cause stress. You may have some tension headaches or some headaches. I've had really bad sinuses all week this week, so I felt not well. all week, right? This causes stress on the body, right? A lot of times people only associate stress with a emotional or a psychological upset. But we know that the body can also become stressed due to some kind of physical illness or condition that it's been put into. So there are many ways that we experience stress. And sometimes we have problems identifying, right? When we are stressed or when we are in the midst of stress. And so we have to be able to first identify that we're having a problem, that we're in the midst of a crisis or in the midst of a stressor. So here are some common symptoms of stress, right? Depression, difficulty falling asleep, or sometimes it may be falling asleep and then staying asleep. Extreme tiredness or fatigue. Some symptoms may include feeling angry, feeling resentful. Some symptoms could be just strictly missing work. People who kind of stop showing up to work regularly, you know, something is off, something's wrong, that's not their norm. Or it may be that they have not done some other obligations that they usually are good at doing. This may be a sign of stress. Impatience, someone gets highly irritable or impatient. Someone who's unable to concentrate or focus. This could be a sign of stress. Loss of pleasure in life. They just have no motivation. They're not excited or anxious about things that they're usually into. It could be an increase or decrease in your appetite. You could have muscular aches for no apparent reason. So you've not physically exerted yourself, or you've not gone and worked out, or you've not walked 5 miles, right? But you're still feeling achiness and pain for no apparent reason. You may have stomach or intestinal disturbances. So you may start feeling sick on your stomach. You may have a runny stomach, diarrhea, things of that nature, and not necessarily caused by a particular meal or food that you've eaten. You may have sweaty palms. You may get tension headaches. You may have performance anxiety, things that usually you have no problem completing or performing at. You now are overly anxious about it and unable to really perform or deliver in the way that you normally could. These are all common symptoms of stress. Okay. And of course, there are more. So this of course, is just one example, or a few examples, I should say. Oh boy, I'm showing all kinds of stuff now. Or maybe you can't see it. I always seem to hit this button and I lose what is on my screen. And so in terms of, ways to handle this stress, there are several. I keep doing this. You all probably have no idea what I'm talking about. I keep hitting the wrong button. I think I need to close down this stuff. This is not helping. And okay, so we'll talk about several ways to handle stress or manage stress today, but here on this first handout are just sort of some really quick tips in which to do that. So 1, you may exercise tension away. You might want to join a health club, do aerobics, yoga, Tai Chi, strength training, cardio, a treadmill, elliptical, stepper or climber. Whatever you may do, you may just go and walk in your neighborhood or in a park or somewhere where you can go, in a mall. It's getting cold. I think I'll transition to, doing some walking around one of the area malls when it's too cold to do that outside like I'm currently doing. But exercise, moving the body, relieving tension physically is a really good way to handle or manage stress. You might also learn to deal with negative people. There will always be negative people. There will always be someone that will attempt to steal your joy. There will always be a hater, or a Debbie Downer, or someone that's just otherwise negative, not supportive. Conflict resolution is a good way to handle this, learning how to avoid conflict, how to resolve conflict, especially if these are people that you have to deal with. So if these are people in your family that typically are more negative than positive, or if it's someone on your job, a supervisor, some coworkers or colleagues that you can't really avoid, learning how to deal with different styles of people, or characteristics of people, different types of people. This will all be important. Increasing and enhancing your communication skills can also help with negative people, but also just setting personal boundaries, because again, sometimes you really can only do what you can do, and we don't have control over other people, only our reaction or response to them, right? You may want to join a community, social, recreational club. You may want to volunteer, do some sort of community efforts, help other people, just anything to focus or refocus your mind. Service is an excellent way to do that. I think that that's what we all owe, I think, as our debt, you know, for living, right? For having this blessing of being in this physical plane, is to help others, to be in service to man, or mankind, I'll say. Express yourself. Expressing yourself, a lot of times there are a lot of stress associated with people holding in, holding back, swallowing words that they like Francis would say, and maybe feel that they can't say. This, of course, we know affects our throat chakra, and we know that our thyroid gland is there. We know that a lot of emotions or expressing comes from a balanced throat chakra. So a lot of times when we feel like we've not spoken up for ourselves, stood up for ourselves, we really suffer. So figure out a way to express yourself. Talk to someone about whatever is bothering you, or things that you feel you couldn't say or didn't say in certain situations. You may end up writing those things down, which is still a way of expressing. If you do feel like you need to actually talk and speak the words, you may record into your phone or a audio recorder and have sort of a, rather than a written journal, a audio journal. Some people who are hands-on people or kinetic, kinesthetic learner, may want to build things, draw, do things with their hands to express themselves. But whatever way you are able to express yourself, to release tension and stress, find that outlet and do that. You may also reassess or change your lifestyle. Sometimes just reviewing your schedule, like when you get up, what time you do what activities, sometimes just tweaking that a little bit, learning how to fit it into whatever new work schedule you have, or whatever other obligations your children or your family or your mate has, and working or reworking how you plan out your day. You may need to devise a new life plan. You may set some new goals, revise some old goals, things like that. Changing your mindset, your perspective, all of this will help improve your overall well-being. You may also decide to practice your spiritual beliefs, tap into your innermost power, pray more, meditate, speak to other spiritual counselors, people who can give direction as to how to focus yourself, aligning yourself with spirit. You may burn incense. You may do all these things that some people will think is evil or spooky, right? But we know all these natural gifts that God has given. We know that there are crystals or gemstones that naturally form in the earth. They have different healing powers, a lot of which will help you meditate and focus and get mental clarity. A lot will help you connect to nature and spirit. And of course, when I refer to spirit, we're always talking about good spirits, right? But there are so many natural things. Herbs fall into that category. So, you know, all of these have a spiritual component to it. And so utilizing those things, the essential oils with aromatherapy, you may create a certain environment in which you pray or in which you meditate or in which you sit and listen to whatever instruction God has for you. These are all spiritual practices that will allow you to empower yourself and deal with daily stressors. And then you just need to implement a self-care plan. Nurture yourself, treat yourself well, focus on whatever makes you feel good. Pamper yourself. Soak in a bath, soak in a foot bath, get a massage, listen to some music that inspires you, motivates you, allows you to relax. There's so many things. Set time aside. Not that you're doing something, and we know that servicing others is important, but we also have to set aside time for ourselves so that you are recharged, so that you can rejuvenate and regenerate yourself. Because if you don't take care of yourself, you're no good to anyone else, right? So we have to implement self-care, self-nurturing, and self-pampering rituals. These relaxation exercises are some other things that you can do during your time that you are setting aside for yourself. Even incorporated with your calisthenics or your stretching and your movement that you may be doing to physically help yourself. You can increase your productivity by including these relaxation exercises so that the mind and the body are clear and strong. So these, I won't go over these, but feel free to practice some of these, the clenching and then relaxing your jaw, or the raising your heels and tensing up your muscles and your calves and then allowing those to relax, because it has a physical component, but ultimately what it does is give you relief mentally and emotionally and psychologically. If you receive the handouts, you have seen this page here. And the important point here is that this just talks about the physiological impact of stress. So we know that the pituitary gland, right? This is what signals the adrenal glands to release stress hormones, right? And so when the pituitary gland is overworked or it's stressed or it needs to be fed with some good food and herbs, right? We know that it will not send out the appropriate signals, right? Glands are responsible for sending different messages through the body, through the hormones, and they have different jobs that they do. And then the adrenal glands, we know, is what produces the stress hormones, cortisol and such, and they help the body to handle stress. So it's all very scientific and very clear cut as to what physical glands and hormones and such that are affected by stress. And so it's important to address handling stress on all these levels, physically, emotionally, psychologically, and all of that. We know that constant stress causes illness, right? And so it creates an imbalance. And so we really want to emphasize the importance of managing stress. The following handouts give some tips, certain teas to drink, certain types of baths, showers, rituals that can be implemented in which to relieve stress. We know that certain teas like hawthorn blossoms, St. John's wort, lemon balm, skull cap, hops, all of these, lavender, there are many different herbs that help to induce sleep and relaxation, relieves tension from headache, side effects that one would have from a stressful day. There are herbs that can be used in tea form. These same herbs you can use in your bath, but there are different things that we know that we can do to relieve stress in the body. Even yawning, right? Even yawning allows the body to relieve stress, right? You increase the oxygen intake and you release tension. So if you feel a yawn coming on, embrace it. You know, yawn deep and loud to release whatever tension and whatever stress that you can do. We know that certain nuts, they have a lot of minerals in them, calcium, magnesium, and such, but they are also excellent for combating stress. So if you're a snacker, certain nuts and seeds like almonds and sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, things of that nature, these can really be helpful for healing the central nervous system and relieving stress. There are a couple of bath routines that are listed here that I'll let you go over time. Also, let's focus on massage technique. And we know that sometimes these are things that we'll need a partner for, but others we can do as self-massage. But there are different techniques listed here for how to massage the neck, the lower back, the shoulders, and then the feet. And again, this is for your reference, so feel free to go over this in your own time. But speaking of the feet, there is a very specific therapeutic foot massage method called reflexology, where there are different points or reflex zones on the feet that correspond to the entire body. And so these allow for you to, just in using the soles of your feet and even the palms of your hand. I don't think I have the hand chart here, but if you Google it, there's also a hand reflexology chart. So you may be able to affect relaxation or comfort or ease pain in a particular part of the body simply through the soles of your feet and even the tops of your feet, and then your hands as well. And technically reflexology also even includes some reflex points along the ears as well. But usually people are referring primarily to foot reflexology, but just know that the hands and ears may also be considered part of reflexology. But these are all self-massage techniques that can be used to help relax the body. Now, the next section is talking about flower remedies. And then the last section is going to be us specifically talking about herbs that help to increase relaxation and relieve stress. Oh, good, thank you. Thank you, Jerome, for commenting about the group. Okay, so someone is asking about being added to the WhatsApp group. So if Yvonne can maybe make note of that. There's a process, you know, that they have for how they create the groups. I think there are lists that they're put on. So after the 4-week cycle, there's a rotation, I believe. So yeah, if Yvonne can take note of that, someone has left their number and wants to be added to, it would be the next WhatsApp group. Okay. Okay, yeah. Okay. Yes, yes, yes. Oh yeah, Sister Denise has mentioned that before. Yeah, and you know, I'm not that savvy with WhatsApp. Maybe if you send a message to Yvonne directly, I don't know if it's an issue on your computer end, but I think I've sent you the handout, so at least you have that. And pretty much the group I sent, I just kind of split the lessons up and their reading assignments each day, but it ends up culminating into the Saturday call. So each week we still go over what's been sent each day. So I was just curious who was in the group, more so for the purposes of some of the extra, you know, comments and discussions that are in the groups. So it's not necessary that you be in the group. I was just curious. Yeah, okay, so. Okay, yeah, so again, a couple of people are mentioning, and I think has stepped off, or she's probably sending out some other messages and doing some things. And I'll remind her again if she's not. Oh, okay, she posted it. Okay, I knew she was on her job. Okay, yeah. So if I know at least 3 people have sent messages asking about being what's added. So it's just been posted how to apply for the class. So there's a link there that you must go to. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So just want to see if there were any comments or questions before I go into this next part. And Jerome and anyone else who has sent their email, please email me, please. I won't be able to take down your email, but if you send me an email and request the handouts, I will be getting those, the ones from last week and whichever ones from today, I will get those out to you with these handouts. So you see the handout here that says the 38 Dr. Bach flower essences. So basically flower remedies or flower essences are flowering parts of trees and shrubs that are extracted specifically for the purpose of healing and balancing our emotions, okay? Just as it's so common to have stress, it's so common for our feelings and emotions to manifest in different ways. It may be fear, it may be anger, it may be resentment, it may be sorrow, it may be despondency, it may be feeling aloof, or just so many feelings, emotions, and things that different people have, right? Most of us don't only identify with joy or sadness. So either you're happy or you're sad, or you're angry. But there are so many other variations of those main feelings, and then additional ones that maybe we don't always think about. And I think it's absolutely necessary to really focus in on how we're feeling, right? How we feel affects everything. Perspective is everything. If you wake up, you're feeling good, you're hopeful, you're bright, you're upbeat, surely you will face the day better than someone who wakes up and they're dragging and they just really don't want to be bothered. They don't want to see anyone, talk to anyone. They don't want to do whatever they have to do. They're definitely going to have a harder time. They're going to struggle through the day. So not that we'll all be happy all the time, right? It's just not normal. That's not normal. And anybody who tells you they're always happy and they're never sad or they're never angry, one, they're lying, or two, they're in denial, right? And so even though all of these emotions are very normal, what we of course aspire to do is to be happy most of the time, or to be at least hopeful, or, you know, have a sense of joy. That's sort of the season that I am in right now. There are a lot of stressors in my life, a lot of moving parts, I say, a lot of different roles and responsibilities that I have to deal with, right? So I'm focusing on always finding the joy and always being joyful. And for me, part of that is always having a heart of gratitude. So you always have to be grateful for everything. So for every bad thing that's happening, right, I'll say, whew, well, I'm grateful that this happened, or it could have been worse, or, okay, whew, I ran out of gas, and I did. I ran out, I'm bad with gas. I will see that little light come on, and I'll say, I can go another 10 or 15 miles. So yes, I can take the children to school and get back to the house, or run this errand or whatever before I need to stop at the gas station. So, you know, one day as I am passing by yet another gas station, right? Literally had just passed a gas station and I ran out of gas. Now, I didn't have a gas tank. Who carries inside of a car? I mean, unless you have a pickup truck. I didn't have a gas tank or a gas container, right? So, but I'm in a city, you know, I walked 3 blocks to get, you know, a gas can. Because even though I knew they would have one at the gas station, I just assumed it was going to be cheaper to walk, you know, to another little store, get a gas tank. Walked back up, and it was small. It was too small for my vehicle. So I had to fill it up twice, right? So, so I created a lot of that because I kept passing gas stations. But what I still had to say to myself, each friend that I called to say, guess what happened? I still had to say to myself, what on the highway? So I'm grateful. Or I could have been in an area where there was no store or a gas station nearby, or people that I know, or really I was so close I could have walked home. So if push came to shove, I could have left the car and gotten home safely, right? So in that situation, I still found the grace and the mercy in it, because I could have been put in a much worse situation. It could have been late at night. It could have been just so many worse things that could have happened, right? So even when these bad things happen, we have to find, some people call it the silver lining, right? Or we have to find the good in it. Or at the very least, get the lesson out of it, right? So even if you still like, this still stinks that I had to go through this, at least still find, okay, what role did I play? What can I learn from it? You know, how will I move or operate differently next time, right? So these flower remedies, though, help to get us there. Because sometimes we can just wallow in certain situations, certain bad circumstances, and we can't get out of it. So knowing these characteristics about ourselves and what remedies to take to reverse it can help change our disposition. It can help us have a better, more broader disposition on life, or perspective on life. So all of them kind of sound negative. So let me just say before we start going through them. So all kind of have sort of the negative aspect, but just know that when you take this particular remedy, you will not have this negative characteristic anymore. So this is how to reverse it. So this is the antidote, right? This is the antigen, okay? So let's start with the first one, agrimony. So agrimony is a flower essence or flower remedy that is good for people suffering with inner torture, right? This is the person that puts on the facade or the perception that everything is fine. They're always cheerful. These are the people that wear the mask, right? And they act as if all is well. They got it, they can handle it, no problem, what have you. But really they're suffering in silence, right? This is a remedy to help address that issue. Right? So if that's you, if you're always kind of putting on a happy face, but inside you're really feeling the reverse, this is the remedy for you. Okay. Beach, let's skip down to beach. Beach is for the person that's highly critical, always kind of criticizing someone else, really intolerant of others and their differences. They usually on the arrogant side, you know, they know it all. They only see things the way everybody wrong or should do better, right? This is a remedy for, or beach is the remedy for that type of person, okay? Let's skip down to cherry plum. Cherry plum is for the person that's suffering from uncontrolled, irrational thoughts, right? They have a fear of losing control and doing something terrible. They have that fear of kind of just going crazy. They may have uncontrollable temper tantrums or outbursts. They may be impulsive, maybe even suicidal, right? Cherry plum is the remedy to turn that around, okay? Let's skip down to a couple of my favorites. Elm is one of mine. People who are very, you know, high strung, on the go, you know, usually gets a lot done, has a lot on their plate, so to speak, such as myself. This might be a remedy for you. So Elm treats the person that's temporarily overcome by inadequacy or responsibility. So not that they're inadequate or inept, but they have a lot of responsibilities and they're just overwhelmed with everything. And they feel like, even though I could normally under perfect circumstances get all of this done and be successful, right now I'm sort of in a slump and I'm just overwhelmed and I need help kind of getting through this list of chores and responsibilities that I have to do. Elm is what that person would need. Gorse is another one I think is important in this day and time. This is for the person that's feeling desperate, hopeless. They're feeling defeated, like they feel like, oh my gosh, I cannot just take one more upset, one more challenge, one more bad or traumatic event. And this is a person that says, oh, what's the use? Like, what's the point? I just can't do this anymore. Gorse is what can help turn those set of emotions around, okay? I have never really highlighted Heather. Let's talk about Heather. Heather is for people who are obsessed with their own troubles and experiences. They're talkative, boring type people. They're very, I met someone like this last night. They're poor listeners. So usually this is the person that they will ask you how you're doing, but they're not really listening, and they'll interrupt you, right, to start talking about their problems. You know, this would be that person that they'll be like, oh yeah, well, how was your day? And what's going on? And you say, oh, child, I had such a hard time today. And I went and I got stuck in traffic. And they'll blurt in and they'll say, oh, yeah, traffic is terrible. And guess what? You know what happened to me? And I had this, you have, they're only going to focus on whatever happened to them. It's all about them. Heather is the type of remedy that this needs. Let's get down to impatience. Impatience is an actual flower, right? But it actually does treat impatience. People who are impatient, who don't have the ability to just sort of wait for things to unfold, wait for things to happen. This is the person that gets highly irritated if things move too slow, if things are not falling in line at the rate that they think it should, and so on and so forth. They're usually pretty melodramatic. You know, it's all about, oh, come on, this is just, oh my gosh, I've been waiting here 5 minutes for them to bring my order out. This is ridiculous, right? This is the type of person that could use impatience. And yeah, that's a little bit of me. It is. I'm very impatient. And believe me, I have suffered for it. So this is, and those people are prone to like hypertension as well. And so just know, and I haven't, in a more detailed class, right? We go into these flower remedies in much more depth, right? But I'm simply trying to introduce these to you. But really, for every emotional component that it has, of course, it has a whole physical component, right? All of these characteristics are associated with different organs and a whole set of emotions. And usually a particular emotion will be at the root of it. Most of which at the root of all of our feelings are either, most people think it's anger, but sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's sorrow, right? So there are a few major emotions that most of these fall under. So in studying this in more depth, we would go into all the different characteristics. What's usually the self-talk or the thinking process that a person has, and so on and so forth. So, but I'm just trying to familiarize you with some of these flower essences. And then also there are 42 Australian flower essences. So these are considered English flower essences. And then there are also some plants that are indigenous to Australia that are similar, and they have a few more. But just know there's help for emotional imbalances. God has planted the seeds and allowed these trees to grow throughout the planet to handle how we are feeling, how we are coping with life, okay? Oak and olive I always kind of highlight. I'd like to maybe highlight some that I don't often talk about each week or each cycle. Pine is one of those. Pine is very common, especially in the area here in the United States. But this treats feelings of guilt, self-blame for mistakes of others, and feelings of being unworthy. or unworthiness, right? And so a lot of times, right? And back to when we talked about self-care and self-nurturing, there are a lot of things we need to forgive ourselves for, right? There are a lot of mistakes we've made. And sometimes we hold on to that guilt, that shame, right? And it only hurts us. It only kills us slowly. And some faster than others even. But pine is an excellent remedy if you have a period of time maybe that you were into some things and you were making a lot of bad decisions. Sometimes people who utilize different substances get into these types of slumps, right? Where you maybe make poor decisions because you were intoxicated with some drug or some and then you start feeling like, oh, I ain't no good. I'm just a terrible person. And, you have these feelings of just not being worthy of anything better or anything good, right? Pine is the remedy for that. And that's very important. We always have to heal ourselves. We always have to do the work. And we have to be honest with ourselves because you're only fooling yourself. You're only hurting yourself when you don't do really honest, genuine self-exploration and really figuring, because again, as I warned at the beginning of this, these are all very negative sounding aspects, but we all have them. And thank God there are these remedies that will allow us to kind of turn them around, okay? So if it's something you see here that resonates with you and you're like, yeah, I kind of do that. Oh, that sounds like me. It's okay. It can be reversed. Okay. Rock rose is one. It's for people who easily get alarmed, panicky, right? They're just sort of always walking on pins and needles or eggshells, and they, are scared of just what might happen, right? And I'm gonna skip down to Star of Bethlehem. And this is one that's really good for any kind of traumatic instance, right? And Black people, we've faced trauma for centuries, right? And not that that's our story and that that's where we have to put the period. It's not. It's definitely not. It's a comma. It's definitely not a period, right? But because we have been so traumatized, I would probably venture to say that most of us could or should use Star of Bethlehem, right? So because there's post-traumatic stress, even if you're not currently in a state of getting bad news or traumatic news, or you've not just been in an accident, or you've not just experienced a loss or some other kind of traumatic event, it's deeply seated in a lot of us, right? And so Star of Bethlehem is for receiving any kind of bad news or experiencing some kind of traumatic incident, illness, a death, an accident. Star of Bethlehem. And the last one I think I'll point out is Willow, another one of my favorite, and I've skipped a couple, but I need to move on. Willow is for people who experience resentment and bitterness, right? And women get charged with this, but trust me, there are a lot of bitter, resentful men as well, right? So this is for the person that says, okay, this is just not fair. This is not right. Woe is me, poor me. And they sort of have that attitude, the whole I'm a martyr type of person. Willow helps turn that around. And again, it's not so that you move on and forgive the other person, but it is because that is what will help you elevate yourself and what will help you to resonate higher. So if you're feeling resentful about a situation, a person, a circumstance, you have bitterness, Willow is the remedy for you. The calming herbs, I will not go over too much. Some I've already mentioned earlier in some of the handouts, but just know there are many, many, many sedative or nervine herbs that help to calm and relax the body. They deal with anxiety, they deal with the pain of stress, they deal with poor sleep. So people who are suffering from insomnia, and things of that nature, there are many, many calming herbs that you can do in tea form, but also in capsule form and in tincture or herbal extract form, right? So there are many herbs, and just like with everything, as I've taught before, herbs have many different aspects. And of course, you may not need everything, but the body will innately take on whatever healing powers from that herbal plant that it needs. So while you'll read that there are the sedative effects of some of these herbs, some will have effects on the digestive system, some will have an impact on the musculoskeletal system, the cardiovascular system. And so if in picking the herbs, you see one that does a number of things that you need, that is the best remedy, for you. So all of these will help calm you down. But for example, if you're also having back pain or muscle spasms, then you may pick something like valerian, for example, because it will help with the pain, right? In addition to insomnia or anxiety or just relieving stress. So there are many herbs that are listed here. Feel free to go through, read through these and all of the benefits of these different herbs. I've mentioned valerian, that is one of my favorite herbs in the whole wide world, but there are many other great herbs that are listed here. And I think I'm gonna jump on and catch these last comments that are here. Yeah, yes, there are quite a few. You need some pine. There's quite a few of these that we probably need, right? Yes, so I've posted my email. So yes, if you need a handout and you're not in the WhatsApp group, nanaakua1@gmail.com is, okay, yeah, you have to scroll up. Do you see it there? So a couple of people are asking about the email. Okay, so no actual questions. So let me take a second to put in my email. So yes, nanaakua1@gmail.com is the email. So I thought you all had some questions that I needed to take some time to answer. So then let's take these couple minutes. Before Dr. Wright comes on, we have a couple of minutes. So motherwort, let me go through that one. Most often used for women, right? Just because it has an impact on the reproductive system, helps ease, menopausal symptoms, in addition to PMS symptoms or cramps for women who are still, menstruating. So of course it does that in addition to having a sedative effect. So it's really good for anxiety and just kind of calming, someone down, right? So we know that there are many uses. Skullcap is another common one. Again, it's good for nervous exhaustion. And yes, sometimes it's just exhausting to be in the throes of a stressful situation. And you may feel like, well, I've not done anything, but I'm so tired. That is what nervous is. That's what exhaustion of your whole nervous system is. Mentally, there's a commercial here in the States and it says depression hurts, right? Because we typically think about depression just being in your mind, but it can have a physical pain to it. And so the same with an emotional stress, right? You think that it should just be how I feel emotionally, not how I feel physically, but absolutely everything is intertwined. It's all relative and it's all relevant. Kava Kava is another favorite of mine. Kava Kava is for folk who are having panic attacks, anxiety attacks. It's excellent for that. Probably the first one I would try. So if you know that you get overly anxious or in certain situations, you're sort of frozen and panicked with anxiety or feeling anxious about a situation, this is one of the first ones I would try. Is Kava Kava, rather than say a passion flower or a lemon balm or a chamomile. A chamomile I would go to first for a younger person, a child, or something that's sort of mild. Oh, I'm just feeling a little flustered from the day. Oh, I'm just gonna have a nice, cup of chamomile tea. But if you're really, to your, height of anxiety, something like Kava would be more appropriate. So yeah, so I won't go through those. What I will suggest at the end and earlier on, I was sort of trying to give sort of assignments per se, rather than just reading assignments. It's just the problem with being able to really evaluate stuff. So this is sort of a self-evaluation thing that I would suggest here, is to do some of the self-evaluation things that are at the end of the handouts, like the personal care plan. This is sort of what to do when you're not feeling well, what to eat, what to drink, what supplements to take, who to call, what point to call for assistance, when to go to the clinic or the hospital or the ER. This is just something you would fill out on your own, right? And then the stress symptom checklist, also another self-evaluation tool. Evaluate for yourself how stressed you are and in what areas, so that you can give attention, appropriate attention and time to those things, so that you'll know, okay, maybe I am having physical stress and didn't realize it, right? And then you'll focus on how to address those things. Or you'll know that, oh, okay, well, this is something within me spiritually, like I'm feeling empty and I'm feeling at a loss, and I just, I'm unforgiving, and I'm, not really good with helping or caring about other people and having empathy and all of that, right? All of this is just your life. And then you can refer back to the handouts as to what flower remedies to use, what herbs to take and such, so that you can feel better and be better. Okay, so I think my time is up. And so if there are any other questions, or if you need anything, feel free to email me. And thanks for joining us. And I bid you good health and peace.
Yes, thank you very much, Nana Akua, for the lecture. I think we all enjoyed and learned more. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you. You too.
We are going to continue the call with the Pan-African organizing class. Right. Yes. Yes, Dr. Red, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm here. I thought you said you were going to continue with something. What did you say?
The Pan-African organizing class.
Oh, okay. Me. All right. No problem. I thought you had something else that you were putting in there. Okay, no problem. You see me momentarily. So welcome, everyone. Let me get my camera together. I switched up a little bit this time. So welcome to another session. I was listening. I always listen to Nana Akua's session, very informative. So thank you for that. So we had readings this week, and they actually dealt with the two critical cases that in our course, if you had a chance to peruse the syllabus, are essential to understanding concrete expressions of Pan-Africanism, as well as the dialectical relationship. One of the pieces that I generally use was not included, the one by Amilcar Cabral, but I've since located it. Unfortunately, sometimes the stuff I use for this course, I use some materials for the university setting, and I definitely share those materials in this course. And for some reason, I wasn't able to access that at that time, but I have since then. So I will be sharing that in this session. If you are following along with the syllabus, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's direct reference to the piece by Amilcar Cabral, where he speaks to Black Americans or African people in the diaspora, okay, and making a contribution to the struggle. So that is the main thing. The other thing is what I'll do, because I know there's a lot of people following along who are not in the course, and that we're streaming this on Facebook. What I'll do is I will, of course, as usual, share the reading materials as well, okay, while we do this, so that people who are streaming on Facebook and other sources will be able to see the reading materials for this course as well. Okay, sorry guys, I have an alarm going off. Okay, so bear with me. Let me get my camera together, and I want to share. Do I have permission to share my screen? I have permission to share my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So hold on one moment. I'm going to be sharing that. So we have two cases, and I'll just start off with sharing those, and you'll see me too. However, more importantly, I want you to see the readings. So this week I'm sharing from my phone. That being said, this is a critical case. This is a very important case. I hope everyone was able, can you see it? Chapter 5, the Liberian crisis.
Yes.
Can everybody see that? Okay, all right, perfect. And you'll see me too in a second. This is very important because very often what happens with us in the context of Pan-Africanism is that many people can argue that Pan-Africanism is esoteric. It is not concrete. It is not real. What has it done for us, if anything? You know, it's something intangible, more like a feeling that we have about each other as opposed to a reality. And very often we have no rebuttal for this because we don't know ourselves. We have no understanding of what Pan-Africanism actually is. And we have very few historical cases or established historical cases where Pan-Africanism has been expressed. And this particular case addresses that, okay? It is a case that is in the book, Booker T. Washington in Africa. It is a case that is on Liberia, the Liberian crisis. And it is really obscure because I think few people know or knew about Booker T. Washington's role in particular. I mean, if we are pigeonholed into this concept that if it wasn't Du Bois or even Garvey, although I'll explain the relationship between, if I haven't already, I'll explain the relationship between Garvey and Washington and how there is no Garvey in the United States without Booker T. Washington, literally, and also in terms of theoretically, in terms of the theoretical line that doesn't exist without Washington either. However, if it's not people like Du Bois or others, we tend to have the attitude that it doesn't qualify as Pan-Africanist. So we have been short-sighted in evaluating what is actually Pan-Africanist in nature, in practice, okay? And that's very unfortunate because what it has done is it's robbed us of knowing things like this for a long time when it could have been to our benefit, at least on an international and policy level. So this is very important. So let me just jump right into the case so that I don't, this is a 25-page case. It's lengthy. It goes into the details of what happened during the Liberian crisis, and that is very detailed. So I can't go into all of that now. So what I'm going to do is hit the high points of the conclusion and give some level of an introduction to it, just so you have an understanding of precisely what it was. Okay. So in 1907, between 1907 and 1908, there was a situation in Liberia. And some of you probably already know Liberia was a country and is a country in West Africa that was essentially established by a racist organization here called the American Colonization Society. Some of the things that surround the establishment of Liberia are very interesting, given the fact that Back to Africa movements that would take place in the future. So in 1847, this happens, the establishment of Liberia. However, by the American Colonization Society, later on, turn of the century, and even during the 18th century and 19th century, you would have African people here who would talk about expatriating, repatriating, leaving, and going back to Africa. However, they are sharply criticized in spite of the reality, right? There's another chapter I'm going to share, but we won't fixate on that further advances this idea of the dialectical relationship that I want to talk about. But in there, the reason why I'm mentioning it now, it has Henry McNeil Turner in there, who essentially schooled Booker T. Washington about Africa and what was going on the ground and the prospects for expatriation, resettling in Africa. So I say all of that to say that we have always been engaging in this idea of leaving the United States and expatriating and resettling on the African continent. However, and we are sharply criticized for it when we do. However, the only organization who had a successful repatriation or resettling of the African population in the United States was spearheaded by the US government and the American Colonization Society. Very interesting. And it goes without the same kind of attack and criticism as the African population within the United States having a desire to do that very thing for ourselves or themselves. Okay. So in other words, Marcus Garvey is sharply criticized for his Back to Africa ideation and ideas. Okay. However, few will criticize the American Colonization Society and Lincoln and others who would eventually be involved in resettling African people, America, back to the African continent. Okay. The place where the American Colonization Society engaged in resettling people is known as Liberia in West Africa. And essentially, there would be always an US influence in the country, although the United States would never stake claims to the territory, simply for one reason, which is if you stake claims to the territory, then you must also give economic support. And they did not want to do that, so they do not stake claims to Liberia. Simple as that. They have a relationship to some degree. However, they are not going to lend economic support to building an African nation for the formerly enslaved population in the United States. Simple as that. And so in 1907, 08, after years of already being in Liberia, the African population in the United States that are settled there commonly called the Americo-Liberian population. And some people have a problem with that terminology, and I totally understand that too. They would begin to have problems on the ground with the indigenous Liberian population, meaning the African population and ethnic groups that had never been displaced and then repatriated to Liberia. But also, more importantly, what was going on in Liberia was that the French, British, and German colonial forces would actually attempt to annex Liberia. In other words, take it. At the time, there were only two independent African nations on the continent, meaning uncolonized territories on the continent of Africa. Those two were Liberia, one, and Ethiopia, the other. And I'm sure many of you have heard that Ethiopia had never been colonized, the Battle of Ottawa and all of that. So of course the Italians tried it. They tried it, it didn't work. And on the West, the French, British, and the Germans would attempt, but not really. The French and the British were the primary imperial forces who would attempt to take the territory. What was going on is that they were intolerant of an independent African nation, and unless the United States was claiming Liberia, they were going to seize it, according to them. And they were attempting to imitate each other on opposing borders. So in other words, if the British took the northern part of what is the territory of Liberia, then the French would emulate it on the southern border and take just as much of the territory in the south. They were intolerant of this idea of having African people self-governed and independent in that part of the world, the irony, right, on the African continent. So what ends up happening is that, Liberia is an actual nation. It has a president and has, officials. Unfortunately, and I'm going to get into the heart of this other issue, which exists, which is the conflict between the Americo-Liberian and the indigenous African population on the continent or in Liberia, which is really at the heart of the matter, really more important than anything else, because it's relevant to what we're talking about and what we're doing here in I Love Black People. But the two, I lost my train of thought. The two nations trying to take it are the French and the British, right? The United States at this moment in time is not interested in Africa, not in the conventional sense, not in the colonial sense. It is interested in exploiting the territories of Latin America, South and Central America. And so most of their interest is in that region in the world. And when probed by the French and the British as to what are their claims to Liberia, they repeatedly cite the Monroe Doctrine, that they are not in seeking territories in Africa at this moment. The truth of the matter is that the United States, one, does not want to have economic responsibility by claiming Liberia in any significant way, which is fine and good, right? Because if they give economic support, they will claim the nation. Two, the other reason is they have not figured out that Liberia has a significant amount of rubber, and that the nation itself could be exploited for the industry, the rubber industry. And so they have if you understand how the United States functions, you know that the United States generally doesn't go anywhere in the world to do anything unless they have economic interest in the region. They had no economic interest in the region. So what they do instead is sit off the coast of Liberia and engage in putting down conflicts between the Americo-Liberian population and the indigenous African population in Liberia. which is very problematic. And really, as I go further, we'll talk about that, because it leads to, it's like a sowing seeds of regret, meaning this issue, right? The so-called African from the United States who had survived slavery and is returned and is identified as a miracle Liberian. And having a conflict, continuous conflict with the indigenous African ethnicities that have never been displaced by enslavement in Liberia. This issue right here, our issue, really, that's what it is, will be, is a seed of regret, right? It will sow many seeds. It will be a seed that is sown and will produce a lot of regretful things in the nation. That being said, at the time, the elected officials in Liberia would contact Booker T. Washington, because what is happening is that the French and the British conclusively have decided that they are going to take Liberia, period. Okay. If the United States is not taking stating claims that they have repeatedly asked, they will not tolerate an independent African nation in the region, and therefore they will annex it. Okay. Booker T. Washington is the person they contact, and he is able to become the key negotiator on this issue. And I'll just tell you in advance, since you hopefully have already read it, he is able to bring this situation to closure, so to speak, in the sense that he is able to secure at least the future of Liberia in this moment, when the future of Liberia is really in serious jeopardy. Okay, you have two imperialist nations who are known to be the biggest colonizers on the African continent. The French and the British get the lion's share of Africa. And this is on the brink of World War I, right? World War I has not began yet, which is essentially where Europeans fight over the territories in Africa. I hear so many interpretations about World War I, but at the end of the day, if I wanted to talk about it succinctly, that's what it is, okay? It was a war over the territories in Africa by those who were not quite satisfied with the Treaty of Berlin, okay, the Berlin Conference. And so the French and the British are well known for having gotten their lion's share of the African continent. And they are attempting, you can see leading up to the war, they are attempting to secure as much territory as possible. Certainly a territory which they may or may not have known at this moment has an exceptional reserve of rubber. Okay, and so it is Booker T. Washington that the two Liberian officials, along with a U.S. consulate named Lyons, contact in order to help. Let me just read this very briefly, this quote, as you guys see it, we're starting out with here. It says, so this is Washington. One of the responses he gives in the process of working with Liberian officials to see how they can come to some resolution around securing Liberia. And I'm just going to hit the high points, okay, from this point on. So that was my lecture on Liberian crisis, because I don't want to spend all our time on it. I want to get to the African exclusion measure. He says, no one, not even the citizens of Liberia, is more interested in the progress and success of Liberia than I am. And why is he saying that? He is already positioned by this time. He is already positioned and has the proper orientation and ideology or ideological development to act on behalf of Liberia and secure the nation. What I'm saying is that he has already been through some things, okay, that I may or may not be able to discuss here really quickly, but he's already been through some things that transform him. So by the time we get to 1907, 1908, Washington has already engaged in the Togo expedition and some other things, and has great communication with people on the continent of Africa. So he is very behind the scenes nonetheless, he is very well positioned and aware of the dynamics on the African continent. And yes, he identifies with Africa. If anybody doubts that, go read the book, The Story of the Negro, The Rise of the Race of Slavery, okay? In that chapter on Booker T. Washington, Pan-Africanism and Pan-Africanists, I delve a little bit into that, okay, where that ideation came from. That being said, he is poised and ready and actually glad that they contacted him, okay? I'm going to skip over and just go to the conclusion so that I can delve into just some particulars. So why is this an example of Pan-Africanism? One, it's an example of Pan-Africanism primarily because of the simple fact that it is an example of Pan-Africanism simply because of the fact that Washington is able to secure the nation as a whole for African people and continue for it to be an independent African nation, okay? We should understand that on the brink, essentially the options were to keep Liberia or for Liberia to be taken and completely annexed by the European imperialist powers, okay? I'm moving around here, and so I wanna just, hold on one second. I wanna just get to the conclusions. Okay, so let's skip that. Well, let me do Washington's recommendations first. Okay, so, if you read the case, then essentially, he is the key negotiator. This is like a marathon sort of in comparison to the other case that you read on the African exclusion measure. What happens is that this case begins in 1907, 1908. It continues to 1912 when they have a resolution. It's a long, protracted struggle around negotiations, keeping people interested, the United States interested, and at least behind the scene way on the issue that is Liberia. He leverages the US vote or the Black vote in the United States as he talks to Taft and Roosevelt around what they will and won't do in order to secure Liberia. He's overzealous, as you know, and if you read the last chapter that we had in this class on Pan-Africanism, you know that he has some invested interest in Africa, having wanted to be a missionary himself, not because he was religious, but because he wanted to go to Africa. He didn't know any other way to do that. That being said, he is the only person who has the influence and the power at the time to call a meeting between US President Roosevelt, incumbent President Taft, Secretary of State Elihu Root, and hold this secret meeting at the White House with the Liberian Commission. That, by the way, is what this image is, okay? Washington invites the Liberian Commission to the US, to Tuskegee, but then also hosts them in Tuskegee and brings them to Washington, DC to hold this private meeting. Normally, no, how a other or a foreign nation appeals to the United States State Department is not through these means, but because Washington is, yes, an advisor to both Roosevelt and Taft, he utilizes these relationships in order to negotiate on behalf of Liberia and have and host a one-on-one session. So when you hear this thing like, oh, Booker T. Washington was the first Black guy to go to the White House, that's nonsense. He was he frequented the White House, right? So there's outside information, there's inside information. This meeting is not lost in history because I can document it. It is well documented, but it is not something that is generally in a public realm outside of the publication of this case. But he hosts a private meeting in Washington, DC at the White House with some of these individuals you see here in this image. around the fate of Liberia and the annexation, attempted annexation by the British and the French. So he does that, but he also is the person who, when negotiations fall through, he follows through and once again pushes for a international deal, brokering an international deal, which would essentially pay people who do not deserve to be paid to leave Liberia alone. Side note, I had a meeting with someone, a dean. I won't say what school, but the person was very interested in this particular case that I wrote about. And the person who was a non-African person said to me, so what claim were the British and the French making to Liberia? What legitimate claim did they have to Liberia? You know, these are always funny questions to me because as far as I'm concerned, no European nation has any legitimate claim to any territory in Africa. I mean, the insanity of all. And so I said just that because, I mean, you know, that's the truth. And I said, they had no legitimate claim. That's like saying, what legitimate claim does a thief have? The thief has no legitimate claim to anything. And I said, they had no legitimate claim. And so that's the situation. The French and the British have no legitimate claim. However, ultimately how Washington resolves this is by forcing the issue and then of course forcing there to be a international deal brokered by the US to get Liberia out of the situation. And it really is a live to fight another day type of case, meaning that either it was going to be annexed or this was what the deal was going to be. Many shortcomings to this deal. Let me just tell you who's in this image really quickly, and then go to the details of the deal. The Liberian Commission to the U.S. hosted in Tuskegee by Booker T. Washington, standing left to right, Charles Branch, Secretary of Rep of Liberian Commission, so standing on the top left, and Booker T. Washington there in the middle. Charles Anderson, Collector of Internal Revenue. Okay, seated. Well, he was upright next to Washington. Seated left to right, Charles B. Dunbar, G.H. Gibson, former president of Liberia, and J.J. Dawson, former vice president of Liberia. So here you have seated 3 Liberian officials. Then, of course, on the ground, far left, seated to the far left on the ground is Emmett J. Scott, who is Washington's executive secretary. A lot of what you will see transpire with him privately and secretly is not at the behest, but it is at the maneuvering of Emmett J. Scott, okay? And then, of course, on the far left, you have Thomas Calloway, okay? And Calloway is actually, historically, if you understand what was involved in the Paris exposition that Du Bois was involved in, both Du Bois, interestingly enough, both Du Bois and Calloway's brother would be sent there, identified to be sent there and engage that exhibition by Booker T. Washington, okay? Which is very interesting. And yes, it is before their famous 1903, post-1903 conflict, okay? That being said, this very commission would go on to, that meeting at the White House where negotiations would take place. Now, let me show you the recommendations, go through them, make sense of them, that Washington gives. Ultimately, and I can't go through every detail of the case, but I think I gave you some of the most important points. I'll read this a little bit. Booker T. Washington gave his own recommendations, which he communicated directly to Ernest Lyon and President Daniel Howard of Liberia. His advice and recommendations address three important areas of Liberian life: education, economics, and the social relations that had been disrupted since the settlement of Americo-Liberians in the country. First, Washington warned President Howard regarding the rift between Liberians and Americo-Liberians. Washington knew that the conflict between the two groups held the potential to destabilize the nation. He suggested that the whole future of Liberia hinges upon its ability to get hold of the native population, for the tribal Liberian has very, very real grievances against the minority of Americo-Liberians, descendants of deported American slaves who ran the government and controlled the economy. Although African-American, Washington was acutely aware of the inherent injustice involved in resettling formerly enslaved Africans back in Africa, especially as they in turn attempted to colonize Liberia and institutionalize American-style discrimination and policies in their own country, in their new country. Washington warned that failure to resolve conflicts between the two populations would hinder the nation's growth and threatened its eventual stability. This is a very important point because there's two sides to understanding Liberia. I think one of the things, and I was actually working on an article around this, talking just to discuss the fact that this is a dream for many people who survived the institution of slavery to return to the African continent. However, what ends up happening is catastrophic in the sense that this is why we do ideological development, because you have African people who survived the institution of slavery, who go back to Africa and then put themselves and find themselves and desire to be in the same position as their own oppressors and colonizers. See, this is why I always have a problem when we pretend as though African people cannot oppress other African people. We can, and we do, right? So it takes someone who is developed ideologically, right? Not just, having a feeling, meaning you consciously understand why you do not engage in this type of behavior, and you are able to follow through with action. Ideology is theory coupled with action. That being said, there are deep contradictions with the Americo-Liberian population. It's funny because some people had tried to, just kind of critique without reading, but critique my addressing of this case. And really, certainly my position is what Washington's was, which he is sharply critical of the Americo-Liberian position. And if you read the entire case, you know that he identifies, which is why I started out with the quote. He says, no one, not even the native Liberian, is more interested in the fate of Liberia than I am. Okay, because what he's saying is that, no, I'm not even interested in Liberia just as an African person who would love to be resettled on the continent. I am interested as though I am the native Liberian, okay? And my interests are bound up with them because I am interested in seeing an independent African nation survive, period. And so when you're taking that honest position, I think this is something important for us, particularly those, this is probably one of the few times where we have a lot of African so-called Americans in this course. We have to be very, very, very careful about our posture with relationship to Africa and African people on the continent of Africa. It's almost like it's almost like the Anglophone Francophone conflict, which is not our own, okay? But if you have ever stayed any length of time on the African continent and gone from country to country, you know that that's a very real conflict between the colonized people. We don't need to do that. And I think that Washington is astute and intelligent enough at the time to understand that this very point right here, He suggested the whole future of Liberia hinges upon its ability to get a hold of the the native population. For the tribal Liberian, and I don't like the terminology, but it's very much terminology of his time. You should say the ethnic Liberian has very real grievances against the minority of Americo-Liberians, descendants of deported American slaves who ran the government and controlled the economy. So in other words, what happened is, and you hear this a little bit in the philosophy and opinions of Marcus Garvey, he talks about colonizing Liberia. That should never be our posture. And Washington has the correct posture, because when he is solicited by a venture capitalist, a European, Anglo-American venture capitalist, to help him colonize the Negro in the Sudan, he makes it very clear, I'm not interested in colonizing the Negro, the African person, the Black person, whatever you want to call him, anywhere. I am not interested in colonizing anyone anywhere. And so this right here, this case touches home, because certainly I'm an African person whose ancestors defeated the institution of slavery and survived the institution of slavery. And essentially, some of those very people, not my direct ancestors, but many of those people who lived during that period, would return to Africa, namely Liberia. And to go back to the African continent and not understand that you cannot do what has been done to you is amazing to me. Okay, there should have been a whole, but you have to understand it is a racist organization that is there at the helm of repatriating or resettling the Americo-Liberian population. So who knows what transpired in that context too. But also we have to have the proper posture. We cannot be, I'm not going to name groups, but there are groups of people in the world who have been who've lived in a certain place, and then when they return, they think that they can displace, marginalize, oppress the population that has been there and has never left. We can't be that way. Okay, so this case really gives you a good picture. There are some white historians who try to tell you that Washington's posture in relationship to Africa is that of a colonial administrator. Absolutely not, because colonial administrators don't point out contradictions in their behavior. He is pointing out the contradiction of the African population from America in Liberia and their behavior as a result of trying to colonize the indigenous Liberian and setting up a system of discrimination. This is why you have the Taylors. This is why you had Americo-Liberians in Liberia who overwhelmingly dominate the government. This is essentially what we would call ethnic struggle, okay? Ethnic battle, ethnic warfare, if you will. The US military is sitting off the coast of Liberia, putting down conflicts between the indigenous Liberian population that had never been displaced and the so-called Americo-Liberian population. And Washington says, resolve this. So do you guys understand that this right here, we always think that our struggle, and this is why we do this kind of work, right? Analyze the context, the history, the setting, all of that. Many of us think the struggle is fighting these people who oppress us. Few know that our struggle is achieving unity amongst us. Unity within Liberia insulates it and are able to fight these struggles on the ground as opposed to fighting each other. The internal conflicts give people outside an opportunity. So unity insulates us. Unity protects us. Right here, we know years later, we will come to understand that this very issue between the American Liberian population and the Native Indigenous Liberian population will be the seed of war. The war that the women bring to it, and the 13-year war in Liberia is a production of this. The presence of a Taylor administration and the CIA in the United States is the fruit and the production of this very conflict. Okay. So Washington's second recommendation in regard to, and he's talking to Liberian officials. He has a very different conversation with US officials. He understands the difference, as we should all understand, the inside conversation amongst African people and Africa's descendants, and the outside conversation, the conversation you have with everybody else. And we know there's people always on the line, listening, watching, whatever, but we still do the work that we have to do, right? So you need to know what conversation is for you. This is happening in private. He is able to privately communicate in writing with Liberian officials directly and tell them what they need to do, because Tuskegee by this point, and we skip over this, you don't read this part of the book, I don't use it for the course, but I probably will share it. He has already perfected the Tuskegee Mallet, is exporting the Tuskegee Mallet to Africa. That being said, Tuskegee is, there's a reason why the UNIA models itself after it, because it has 44 industries. It is a example or sample of nation management, nation building, a sustainable African nation. This is what Tuskegee is a model of. And it's very clear for people who study this history around sustainability, what was going on there. And so he is seeking to share some of these things with the African world. And this is why he is sharing some of what you see here in the second recommendation with Liberian officials. He says, second, Washington advised President Howard to develop and implement industrial education programs aimed at stimulating the establishment of industry in the country. Washington had a very shrewd outlook on economic advancement, and regardless of his relations with Western officials, he advised Liberia against the consumption of Western goods. Writing to the Liberian Register, he said, every time a Liberian eats a 10 can of goods imported from any other country, it means poverty for Liberians. It means that Liberians are paying somebody else to manufacture the 10 cans and paying the freight upon the cans. And all, of course, means money taken out of Liberia. What he's saying, that this right here very openly and obviously positions him as somebody who is not aligned with the West, is saying, listen, let me tell you, stop consuming their garbage. You grow raw goods right below your feet. Send it out and they put it in a can and send it back to you with the tax and salt and everything else. And every time you open a can that comes from outside, you seal the fate of Liberians in poverty. Okay? Stop consuming their goods. This is the issue with almost every African nation, both on the continent and out in the Western Hemisphere. Okay? Producing raw goods and then consuming manufactured and canned goods and other goods that are sent back. Same thing that's grown in their country, sent back to them in the can for them to consume. Okay, and so this is a major problem, and Washington highlights that to Liberian officials, like, hey, on the other side of this issue, these are the things to do to build your nation, to build your nation. And let me just say something, you know, because we always, it's very interesting, the conversations as African people that we have in the world. You know, when something goes down, we automatically start talking about, you know, not spending our money with other folks. This was always the program with Washington. Okay. Then we started talking about the economic piece. I don't know about on continent Africa, but well, I do, but very openly in the United States, whenever something happens, goes down, which is always, we start saying, we're not going to spend our money with them. Let's boycott. Let's do this. You don't need a reason to boycott. You just need the consciousness to not spend your money with them to begin with, and figure out how to empower your own. Maybe look at the label and see where it came from. You know, be conscious, make a conscious and deliberate effort to bless and deny who you will, right? So we don't need a tragedy, a catastrophe, in order to spend our money wisely and with people who respect us. This is a common sense thing. Okay, but what he's saying is, in order to build the nation, you need industry, because part of Washington's philosophy and his brand of Pan-Africanism is independence through industry. He knows that independence of industry on the African continent will manifest as something very different. It means that you will be able to run your own nation. You won't be slaves to any other nation because you won't be consuming their garbage. Okay, I'm just being plain, I'm making it plain. Although Washington has often been cited as pro-capitalist, his inclination to protect Liberia from the pitfalls of consumption as opposed to production. Conceptually, this belief was consistent with Washington's philosophy of sustainable economic independence, which was essential to developing Liberia as a nation. And then third, of course, he says undergirded with education, right? So we know that every industry begins with education. He recommends essentially that there are industrial schools. And I think I didn't include the chapter on Tuskegee model in Africa, but those of you who may still think this, Tuskegee wasn't a vocational school. It was a school for teachers that taught the industries, academics, as well as the industries. You need teachers in order to establish schools to teach people, whether it's academic or industry. So that's why it is that. It is a normal school initially that produces teachers. All of its charters say that. None of its charters say it is a vocational and industrial school. So that's just, there are some things, if you read chapter 2 on Pan-Africanism, when I get to Du Bois and stuff like that, in the latter part of those chapters from last week, that chapter from last week, I clarify some of those things. We have big myths in American society around Du Bois, Washington, vocational education, and intellectual development. And those are really smoke and mirrors placed in our community, discourses placed on us by a small group of elite white liberal intellectuals. Okay, that was created by them and was maintained by them. Because if you read that whole chapter, you know that Washington Du Bois conflict isn't even really real. Okay, and that's not my opinion. That's like, if you can follow the Washington papers and go to the heart of it and look at what Du Bois said, what Washington said, all that kind of stuff. So those are things that are divisive tactics for us here, right? The intelligentsia against the working class people amongst African and Black people in America, and fighting over whether fighting over whether we should go the industrial path or the intellectual path. And the truth of the matter is both have failed. Okay, and intelligentsia have betrayed the people, and the working class have just been trying to survive. Okay, and have not reached for independence of industry, meaning own and operating any industry. And think about it, what industries in the United States do Black people exclusively own and operate? None, for the most part. Okay, and what have the intelligentsia done in American society for the Black population? I mean, you got the biggest example with our recent elected officials who were Black in this country. And in terms of policy, I don't care about liking and all that kind of stuff, but when you talk about policy, because that's what politicians do, they create policy and legislation. In terms of policy and legislation, we can't talk about much that they put on the books that is overtly to the benefit of Black people. Matter of fact, you've had some recent politicians tell you that they're not going to do anything only for Black people, even though only Black people have been historically marginalized in this country in a particular way. So anyway, the point is that, we have not followed either program, even though that debate is constructed and planted in our community. That is not a real authentic conflict. And Du Bois says that himself. So Washington says to the Liberian officials, he recommends that Liberia establish an industrial school. Philosophically, Washington subscribed to the view that establishing industry was an important part of building economic independence, and industrial education would facilitate it. Therefore, Washington and Olivia Phelps Stokes, who, let me just say this, she is one of these conservative white folks, or that whole faction, who Washington, woos very often to get money from. So anyway, it's white money, collaborated in the founding of Booker T. Washington Industrial Institute in Liberia. Both were deceased at the time the school was actually open. Washington, working with Stokes' support, also put into place a short-term plan to admit Liberian and American Liberian students to Tuskegee. Tuskegee, let me just say this, since 1893, has always had a steady flow of students from the African continent coming to coming to Tuskegee, specifically from Liberia, 1893, and then continuously all over the continent is represented in Tuskegee in various ways, particularly in the student body. The idea is to get his program exported, independent to industry, masters of various industries, to export it to the African continent. And this is why, actually, more than anywhere else in the world, you have so many Tuskegee models in Africa and South Africa. I didn't share those chapters, but I might share them just if people are interested. In South Africa, in various places, in even East Africa, okay, there are Tuskegee models. All right, so I'll read this briefly, and then I want to go on to the library. Well, actually, I'm not going to read all of this. Sorry. You can read the conclusion and the actual details of this. But really, basically, what it is saying is that, no, this wasn't the best deal, but this was the only deal going. And it was Washington who had the consciousness, the wherewithal, the endurance as a long-term or a long-term negotiator, who could actually bring this full circle as he did in 1912. The United States gets a lot out of the deal. They get to set up a U.S. military base in Liberia. They get to set fire by this time, by the end, right, 1912, they have figured out that Liberia has rubber and that it is lucrative, and Firestone is established in the country. And so those are some of the things that long-term are not good for Liberia, but were part of this brokered deal in order to survive, or order to secure Liberia for survival. So I always talk about it as a live to fight another day type of deal, as opposed to disappear in the moment, which is what the French and the British were aiming for, a additional territory. Now, to be quite frank with you, I think all of these things pale to us not resolving the internal conflict on the ground in Africa, meaning that these are things that could be overcome if we did not have the dynamic of an Americo-Liberian population who was aligned with US government officials who were undermining the development of Liberia. Okay, so while Liberia survives, probably it's not until the 20th century, with the end of the 13 Years' War, where you really see an exercising of these Western spirits from Liberia, in the sense that, there is obvious infiltration in the Taylor administration, and that's rooted in this very period of Liberia's history. Okay, so it's very complex, but I'm going to go from there. Hold on, let me, yes, I'm on my phone. So I'm going to stop this share real quick. And I'm gonna move to the other case. Well, I'm gonna, hold on one second. Well, I'm gonna let you see me for 2 seconds. Well, no, let me, you can see me in a second, but I'm more concerned with getting the other case to you. So I wanna just really, because we're over time already, I'm sure, yes, almost. So if you guys just give me 5 minutes. The African exclusion measure, here we go with the African exclusion measure, which is probably, can you give me permission to share again?
Yes, you're allowed.
Okay. Okay. The African exclusion measure, very important case because it helps us understand why the demographic is what it is in the United States. So just to jump right into it, the African exclusion measure, this is a quote from a article Washington put in a newspaper regarding the African exclusion measure. Through your newspaper, I desire to appeal to the American Congress and to the people of the United States in favor of fair play and justice in connection with the immigration bill now pending before the United States Senate, which by amendment excludes from coming into this country any person of African descent. Okay, that comes from, and if you see how this book is written, that comes directly from Washington Papers, volume 13, page 209. Essentially what happened is the US Senate, well, let me go back just a little bit really quickly to give you historical context. In the 20th century, 1900s, the United States, and even prior to that, the French attempted to open up the waterways, meaning connect the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. And I know you're like, what does this have to do with the African exclusion measure? Well, whoever could connect the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean without having to go around the North and South American land masses would be able to trade faster between the East and the West. And the French had engaged in it, trying to create an opening in Central America in order to open up the waterways, the Atlantic and the Gulf, open up to the Pacific. However, whoever did this would become a superpower in that moment in time in the world, okay? Because they would be able to trade and export goods throughout the world half the time. Theodore Roosevelt in particular was the president at the time in the United States who would try to engage this engineering project once again, and that project is known as the Panama Canal. Okay, so the Panama Canal is just what it sounds like. It is a canal that basically is a series of locks that lift ships up over the landmass in Central America, which is formerly part of Colombia, but present day Panama, so that the ships can go over that landmass from the Gulf over to the Pacific Ocean and have access to the other side of the world. This was a project that utilized overwhelmingly the African labor existing in the Caribbean, Central, and South America. It was a US engineering project. The military was involved. However, they did not utilize American workers for this project. They used the Black and the African, or I would say they're African. Some people say they're Black. Okay, yes. African is the culture, Black are the people. But the point is that is who would be utilized on the project. Long story short, when the project was completed, those people who had contributed their labor to the project would be told, you cannot immigrate. The Panama Canal was completed in November of 1914. December 31st of 1914, the very last day of the year, the Senate, a senator named James Reed out of Missouri, proposed to add a small amendment to the larger immigration bill due to come before the House of Representatives in January 1950. He proposed a small amendment in the Senate on that day, December 31st, 1914, to exclude anyone of the Black or African race from the United States forever. He said Black and African, just in case people were confused. He could have said Black or African, but he was very clear. The measure would pass very quickly without opposition and without little argument. Okay, if you read the case, you see, I give you some of the, the literal stuff. Not only did this measure pass without argument, what would happen is it also would put those it excluded in the same category as undesirables and criminals attempting to enter the country. Okay, so in other words, to be Black or African attempting to enter the United States would also mean you are criminal and undesirable. This is one of the times in US history where they're seeking to criminalize Blackness and African culture, criminalize it, and basically do so through legislation. Okay, so on the record, legislation. Washington found out about this effort and the fact that this had been approved in the Senate through the reading of the congressional record, which tells you he didn't trust them. So he always was reading the congressional record. He saw this. He contacted people on the Panama Canal, officials. He tried to confirm whether or not this was true. And what I'm saying is that the completion of the Panama Canal was the impetus. They wanted to let this African population from the Caribbean, Central and South America know, thank you for your labor. No, thank you on the point of immigration. You cannot immigrate here. You cannot come into this country. We have enough Blacks already, and we don't want any more. Washington immediately understood, regardless of whatever, and we already know that in that part of the world, you may vary even today around identity. There are people who could look like me and will, play around with whether or not they consider themselves Black, and almost certainly very often will not identify as African. However, Washington did not have this problem. Washington did not have this conflict, and nor did the United States. They were very clear about who they were talking about. Washington understood this. He didn't need a crash course on who is African and who is Black. He immediately goes to the officials he knows and says that he is going to challenge this unfair measure. He launches a three-pronged attack. He propagandizes in the paper, which is that quote is from, the quote at the beginning of the chapter is from his attack on this legislation through the Black press, which he still has significant control of. He has also at his disposal something called the Tuskegee machine. Now, more real than anything in terms of the Washington Du Bois conflict was the Tuskegee machine, was Washington's power outside of the public realm. He had a secret network of people who were power brokers and at his disposal, and he utilized them. He had a very utilitarian relationship with them, and yes, he pulled many strings. It is through his Tuskegee machine, who Du Bois criticized because Washington had been known to silence people, both Black and white, and do a lot of dealing through the Tuskegee Machine, his secret network. That Du Bois really had, that was the real impetus of Du Bois' conflict with him. But in this instance, they are both aligned against the African exclusion measure. However, Washington is the only one who has the power to wield to challenge this measure. He sends his Tuskegee Machine up to Washington, D.C. to poll congressmen in the House of Representatives. This measure is coming before the House of Representatives between January 1st of 1915 and January 7th of 1915. His secret network goes up to Washington, D.C. I wouldn't even say infiltrate, but enters the House chambers, holds it up, and of course lobbies very specific congressmen. It's through a congressman from New York that Booker T. Washington's exact words that are in the article find their way onto the floor of the House, challenging this racist measure. Okay, let me say it another way. Washington's words that you will find in the public realm through the Black press challenging this racist measure could be heard also on the floor of the House of Representatives, echoed through a congressman from New York who will cite the same exact arguments on behalf of Washington and those aligned with him. They will hold up. Washington instructs his Tuskegee Machine to pull every string possible to defeat this unfair measure. That being said, they hold up the Congress, they force them to be polled. And then of course that gives them the opportunity to individually challenge and approach individual congressmen and find out how they could stop them from voting yay on such a measure. So essentially, you know that he is successful, okay? This measure would change the demographic of the African population and African communities within the United States significantly. The very next year, this is January 1915, the very next year, Garvey would come into the United States, and had Washington failed to challenge this measure, Garvey would have been denied interest in the United States, and he would come in March of 1916. And yes, he was coming to the United States to do and go nowhere else but to Tuskegee. Okay, the very model that he structured the UNIA after. That being said, Jamaica and other places in the Caribbean are directly called out because of the fact that it is directed towards the African and Black population of the Caribbean, Central and South America. However, would have affected African people coming from all over the world, okay? From the African continent, from anywhere in the world. If you came to the United States and you look Black, or you were African and by name and culture, you would be excluded from the United States and put in the same category as a criminal or undesirable attempting to enter the United States from 1915 on. So we know that had this measure gone unchallenged and defeated, we would have no Malcolm X in the United States, because his mother is indeed from the Caribbean, her ancestry. You would not have, some of you, Obama is beloved, you would not have your beloved Obama because his father would not have come from Kenya to the United States. You would have not had your Colin Powell, who recently passed away. You would not have so many others who would come to the United States and settle and actually contribute to our continuous struggle here in this country. Let me just read this really briefly. The case of the African exclusion measure contrasts the Liberian crisis due to its brief timeline and Washington's very direct opposition to US immigration policies. His efforts in the case exemplify his national inclination to address issues facing African people abroad as well as within the US. There were no conflicting loyalties in this particular case. Washington took to the press and the people publicly condemning the bill as unjust and wrongfully aimed at African people from the Caribbean, Central and South America, but an overt affront to the masses of African Americans within the US as well. He worked behind the scenes as well directly attempting to persuade and challenge those expected to vote on the bill. Washington's ability to influence and affect the outcome of the case in an exceptionally short amount of time was telling. Several African-American leaders from the US publicly opposed the measure. However, so that was Du Bois and Trotter. They all were aligned in this instance against this measure, but otherwise were public, critics of each other in American society by this time. However, Washington wielded a level of unconstituted power that facilitated the bill's repeal through a vigorous and well-organized campaign. The case conclusively recounted Washington's efforts to curtail discriminatory and racist policies directed at African people internationally. Although the amendment specified anyone of the African or Black race, the targeted populations were African people from the Caribbean, Central and South America, who largely identified by nationality, Jamaican, Costa Rican, Panamanian, Trinidadian, etc. However, this did not confuse Washington, who to a large degree understood the scattering of African people abroad due to enslavement. Regardless of the various identities and nationalities, the targeted populations assume Washington's Pan-African consciousness and understanding of their historical context allowed him to act on their behalf. He accurately identified the targeted population as African people and opposed the measure. International students and faculty, which were aware of the amendment and its defeat, wrote Booker T. Washington and thanked him for his efforts. Few doubted that Washington's moral suasion and direct pressure brought upon the congressmen through the lieutenants fostered the defeat of the amendment. So in other words, his Tuskegee machine was the determining factor. It was during this fight against the African exclusion measure that Booker T. Washington challenged U.S. political representatives in defense of African people abroad for the first time. In the previous case of the Liberian crisis, Washington was responsible for the private negotiations and in keeping Liberia on the agenda in the political circles. Here, he vocally challenged the adoption of language that emerged in immigration bill. The language of the bill would change how U.S. policies regulated or eliminated the immigration of African persons into the U.S. And that's the procession to Washington's funeral. Washington would die later on in the year in 1915. So it's really one of the last big things that he did, and he did not do it or need a resounding declaration in order to do it. Let somebody in our time do something like that, defeat some measure. Oh my gosh, we'll never hear the end of it. Although seldom do we have the kind of consciousness. So we did not have the problematic temperament. Put it this way, Washington did not have the problematic temperament to think that if you nationally identify with a particular culture, that you are in fact not African. So in other words, today, what we're still struggling with African people globally is this idea around African identity, right? In the sense that if people are, so in other words, aside from within the United States, and this is still not a resolved issue within the United States, you have many people in the United States who will say, well, I'm Black, but I'm not really African American because I don't know where I'm from in Africa, right? And so, but Washington wasn't confused. And he said African and Black, he understood who they were talking to. I think today, if something like this came before the House, we would have people scuffling and scrambling and scraping and trying to figure out who they are ideologically before they can even organize and move on. It would pass before it is resolved because we have such a crisis around identity still today, right? Almost no one in the Caribbean says African, Jamaican, African, Trinidadian, African, anything, right? I will give credit where credit is due. In the United States, in a country where, you still do, I will acknowledge probably one of the most powerful passports in the world, the people are able to say African American. And that's not without understanding, those of us who know the history, that the real push was to say Africans in America. And that's coming from Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, who that's what he was pushing for. It's Jesse Jackson who wins out, and this is where you get the African American identity from, right? Label from African American. However, Kwame Ture wanted to say Africans in America. Okay. And if you look at Dr. John Henry Clark, what does he say? Land, culture, people. Not Black, but African. African culture, African land, African people, right? And so, you know, so we have that, but Washington was without conflict. Imagine if he had to update his consciousness and say, are the people who are believing that they're mestizo and Indio and this and that in the Caribbean, are they African too? It was targeting them. They certainly today wouldn't even answer to an African identity, and very likely wouldn't answer to a Black identity. However, he was without conflict, and so he could move decisively. It's probably one of the most overt exhibits of Pan-Africanism, probably in a concrete case in our history. Will the inhabitants, the African inhabitants of the UK, rally to say that UK legislation can't lock me out, can't lock you out? Would they organize to support, right? So we need to be functioning that way everywhere we are, right? Not simply in the United States. Okay, so I'm gonna stop there. I mean, I can go on and on and on and on. The name of the book is Booker T. Washington in Africa, The Making of Pan-Africanism. I'm actually the author of it, but I shared these chapters in the course, so you can actually see them there. Thank you. So these are two cases where one can say, so what the hell does Pan-Africanism do for us? Hey, it secured Liberia. It wasn't the best deal, but yes, it was. We're going to survive this, and we're going to work it out later. We're going to survive and live another day so that we can fight another day. That's what the deal was with Liberia. And there was no one else who could have done that at that moment in time. In your syllabus, I talk about a measurable results. You know, we fight about a lot of stuff out here in the diaspora. What we generally don't fight over, and Malcolm is critical of this too, and I am as well. A lot of us out here, we call ourselves nationalists, but we don't really know what true nationalism is about. True nationalists only fight over one thing, and that's nation, land, okay? We don't fight about buses. We don't fight about going to school with people who hate us. We don't fight about any of that. We fight for land so that we can secure nationhood. The Liberian crisis is a perfect example of someone who probably was more of a nationalist than any of the people who would come after and have that label, because he understood the importance of securing Liberia as a nation, okay? Otherwise, you have nothing. So that's the deal with Liberia. But that's a very concrete case. To the African exclusion measure, where he secures the movement of African people through and out, in and out of the United States. And sure, you know, one of the things we're going to come into this because we're going to talk about ethnic conflicts within and internally and all that kind of stuff. And yes, people in the United States, African so-called Americans, are an ethnic group, have become an ethnic group because of shared language, culture, history in this context. That being said, Washington was very clear that because he had a steady flow of students from the African continent, be quite frank with you, more than anybody else that he wanted to protect, that's who he was trying to protect with the defeat of the African exclusion measure. I don't know how stuck he was on the Caribbean, Central and South America. He accepted them as Africans, loving the same heavy presence at Tuskegee, but he was even more committed to his steady stream of students from the African continent, because if you followed what I said in the last chapter on Pan-Africanism, he had a personal desire to be on the African continent. He had a personal agenda to have students from the continent of Africa, and then have them return and share the Tuskegee model and philosophy there. So he's even more committed, and he is not going to allow anything to stand in his way. Ironically enough, the only people, although this measure was directed at Africans from the Caribbean, Central, and South America, and let me be clear, if you read the chapter, you saw that Puerto Rico then is, is not a Commonwealth of the United States, and also is identified as, because certainly there are African people who come from Puerto Rico who have survived the institution of slavery. But more than any of the people that it was directed at, the only people who thanked him are his students from the African continent, which is very interesting to me. Okay. Although there probably was a larger presence from Africans in the Caribbean, Central, South America at Tuskegee. Okay. So the irony of that, but I'm going to hit on a couple of questions really quick. Wow. And I've got to run. Thank you all for being here, and sorry I'm always over time and everything. I'm way over time right now, so by like what 25 minutes almost. Okay, so I don't see a lot of comments, okay, which is good. Yeah, so library is always a critical case and scenario. Is very interesting. So I'm gonna leave it there. I'm going to add the piece on Emile Cabral because like I said, I just located it. So we're kind of going to pile on just a little bit in this next session. We still have another week to go before we're done. So I will add that particular, and probably 2 pieces by Emile Cabral to it. Okay, it's a pleasure. Thank you. I'm glad people didn't have too many questions or comments. I hope the cases are clear. They'll share, I Love Black People will share the information for this book for those of you who are in the US. It's really hard to get the book to the African continent, but at some point I think there'll be a digital copy of the book, and you'll be able to get the book on the continent, probably on a digital form, okay? Thank you, everyone. I'll see you next week. Okay, I'll make sure nobody else had anything to say. And I am because we are, all right? So I will see you all next week. Peace.
Yes, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.